Hello, everybody. This is Rob Pass, the host of the podcast. This week, we're taking a step back in time to 2022 when we spoke with Professor Maully Shah of the University of Pennsylvania about her recent work on gender inequity in the field of congenital cardiology, specifically congenital electrophysiology. I hope you all enjoy this important topic and episode, and I'll see you back next week with a brand new episode. Pediheart, Pediatric Cardiology Today. My name is Dr. Robert Pass, and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm professor of pediatrics at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, where I'm the chief of pediatric cardiology. Thank you for joining me for this 231st episode of the podcast. I hope everybody enjoyed last week's episode on the topic of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and the possible role of the exercise stress test in predicting outcomes. For those of you with an interest in cardiomyopathy, I'd strongly recommend you take a listen to last week's episode 231 with Dr. Jennifer Conway. As I say every week, if you'd like to get in touch with me, it's easy to remember my email. It's pediheart@gmail.com. This week we move on to a very different kind of paper. The title of the work is Mind the Gap: Sex Disparity in Salaries Among Pediatric and Congenital Cardiac Electrophysiologists. The first author of this work is Maully Shah, and the senior author is Carolina Escudero. And the authors come from multiple centers in the United States. Dr. Shah is from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. When we're done reviewing this paper, Dr. Maully Shah, who's the chief of pediatric electrophysiology at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, has kindly agreed to speak with us about it. Therefore, let's move straight on to the article and then a conversation about sex disparities in our field. This week's work is a brief one and is a research letter, and I'll mention the authors, who are Maully Shah, Ann Dubin, Susan Etheridge, Tess Sorrell, Beth Stevenson, and Carolina Escudero. I mention these authors' names, which is something I rarely do, because it's important to remember that this letter is written by some of the absolute true leaders of electrophysiology in the present era. The letter starts with some history of women in medicine, reminding us that it is only about 175 years ago that the first woman graduated from medical school in the United States, and that despite changes in the physician workforce over time, in the field of adult cardiology, women are still fairly underrepresented, with women making up less than 15% of adult cardiologists, and even less than 9% of adult electrophysiologists. The authors then remind us that in pediatrics, women have a more prominent role, remembering that 74% of practicing pediatricians are women, and 34% of board-certified pediatric cardiologists and 51% of recent pediatric board examinees are women. Thus, it would be fair to say that women are rapidly rising as the majority in pediatrics, and soon perhaps in pediatric cardiology. But despite this, the authors state that much is unknown about how women are compensated in comparison to men, and this was the point of today's work. The authors decided to proceed with a survey of the pediatric and congenital cardiac electrophysiologists through the entire physician membership of the PACES organization. The survey was performed in 2020, which I'll remind all was during the worst parts of the pandemic, and contained voluntary data regarding the person's demographics, job location, academic rank, research activity, years in practice, leadership positions, and salary brackets in increments of $50,000 in U.S. dollars. The authors state that they controlled for work activities and then compared the salaries between men and women, and they explain that the survey was sent to all 220 physician members of the PACES Society, and there were 147 respondents, or 67%. They state that there were no statistical differences between men and women demographically, but salary distribution was lower for women, and in Figure 1D, it appears grossly that the curve is basically shifted to the right about one quartile for men. The female-to-male earnings ratio was 0.78, or to state it a different way, on average, women reported a salary that was almost 25% lower than men. When looking at the top 45%, which was equal to or greater than $300,000, for which the group was limited to 60 respondents, men outnumbered women 51% for men versus 27% for women. On multivariable analysis, female sex conveyed a lower odds ratio of having a salary in the top 45% of respondents, with an odds ratio of 0.17. The authors also found that practicing in the United States and practicing more than 15 years were both associated with a salary over $300,000. The authors explained that the only independent variables associated with a higher salary were male sex, increased years in practice, and practice within the United States. They state that the salary was lower for women even when adjusting for rank and years in practice, and they emphasize that they only assessed female electrophysiology doctors who were working full-time, so the part-time factor could not be a confounder of the data. The writers suggest that this inequity in salary in the smallish group should persuade other professional societies to meticulously collect data in their subspecialties, and that this information should be available to all members. And they suggest that enhanced transparency about salary would be good, and that increasing clarity to staff on criteria for salary, retention, and promotion could help to close the pay gap. They also suggest that women should advocate for themselves, insisting on equity. The authors point to limitations of a survey study in which only 67% of potential respondents answered, and they mention that only 58% of the males in the PACES group responded in comparison to 100% of women. And they speak also of the fact that about 3/4 were from the United States, which could limit the generalizability of these findings throughout the globe. The authors also explain that they don't have any productivity metrics or information about on-call responsibilities, as well as other possibly unmeasurable factors that could explain differences in salary. And so they conclude, this study suggests that female pediatric and congenital cardiac electrophysiologists with similar job characteristics, academic ranking, and leadership positions compared with male colleagues earn less, implying that they are paid less for the same work. Well, this is certainly not a high science presentation this week, but I don't think any of the authors considered this to be the case. Rather, it's a bit of a snapshot of how women are doing in regards to equity and compensation, and the suggestion here is not too well. I believe that this is likely only to change when women are in equal positions of authority in our field to men. This day is coming, and perhaps in pediatric cardiology faster than in other arenas. I can only speak to my own department where the chairman is a woman, and the head of finance also a woman. This has had an immense impact on how salaries are decided at my own institution, where we're very mindful of equity in our salary structure and also making sure that any new salary is still well within the structure of the entire division for fairness. However, this is clearly not the case in all areas, and the fact that women are rapidly becoming chiefs of divisions and subdivisions does not make it okay that today we are not at a point of true equity throughout the world. I do believe that the trends suggest that in short order we will finally have similar numbers of chiefs and leaders in pediatric cardiology amongst women, but that day can't come fast enough. If we are to consider making changes, I think it will be important to have more accurate data than that of a survey, though certainly this letter should serve as a signal of an issue. My only concern is that generally many in medicine actually do not really know what their salary is, and this goes for both men and women, due to the large number of taxes, Social Security payments, payments for insurance, and other things that come out of one's check. One really needs a master's in finance to accurately figure out what their actual salary is, and doing this sort of analysis in an anonymous manner should actually be fairly easy. Well, there's a lot to unpack here, and so at this point I think we'll just move forward to our conversation with Dr. Shah. Maully Shah is an attending pediatric cardiac electrophysiologist in the Cardiac Center at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. Dr. Shah obviously has a very special interest in pacemakers, ICD implantation, and electrophysiology in general. She is professor of pediatrics at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, and she is a graduate of the University of Gujarat NHL Municipal Medical College in Ahmedabad, India, and she completed her residency in pediatrics at the University of Connecticut. She then proceeded to pursue fellowship training in pediatric cardiology and electrophysiology at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where she is now the director of pediatric electrophysiology. She's the winner of many awards and has also held leadership roles in many congenital societies in the United States and abroad. It is a great pleasure and honor to have her join us this week to discuss this week's work. Welcome, Dr. Shah, to the podcast. I'm here now with Dr. Maully Shah. Dr. Shah, thank you so much for joining us this week. For those in the audience, Maully is speaking to us all the way from India. Thank you so much for making time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you for having me, Rob. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be on your podcast.
It's very kind of you to say. Maully, I have to tell you, you beat me to the punch with one of my favorite people when you interviewed Ed Walsh recently. I love that interview. I've listened to it 3 times, and despite being friends with him for over 25 years, I learned a lot of new things about him. So I feel like I'm interviewing the master interviewer here. Maully, I very much enjoyed this work. I think a very important work that you and your co-authors have written. Before we get into it a little bit, I was wondering, what was the impetus for doing this survey in the first place?
Rob, that's a great way to start this conversation. The primary impetus was to really understand the job characteristic variations and the existing professional practice landscape in pediatric and congenital electrophysiology. As you well know, we really do not have any granularity for our own subspecialty. And this includes demographic data such as gender, race, and ethnicity, geographic region and location of practice. And then also we try to understand the types of practices, such as academic, private, and mixed, academic ranks and file, full-time versus part-time work, leadership positions, the distribution of administrative, clinical, and research protected time, grant funding amongst pediatric electrophysiologists, and then importantly, salaries amongst pediatric electrophysiologists. And to address the latter, following on the heels of reports from other organizations such as AAMC, AAP, and ACC, we wanted to analyze if there were sex discrepancies in salaries amongst pediatric electrophysiologists. Now, I do want to point out that historically, the lower distribution of pay for female practitioners has been explained away by part-time work, specialty choices, lack of academic rank advancement, and absence of leadership roles. Our study is unique because our focus was on a single specialty, pediatric electrophysiology, and our results showed that there were actually no significant sex differences in the aforementioned variables except salary.
Wow. Interesting that it sounds like you did not actually start this survey exclusively to look at this type of inequity. It was more of a global look, I guess, at all parameters of our field. Am I understanding that right, Maully?
Yes. So we wanted to take a holistic approach because to get to the salary question, we felt that salary was integrated into all these variables. So it was important to establish what these variables were and how they affected compensation. So we took a more holistic approach.
Yes.
And then used salary as an important variable.
I see. Well, Maully, your work clearly suggests inequity in compensation for women. However, it is largely self-reported, and it was interesting to me that a large number of the men who were asked to fill out this survey did not respond, or at least a larger number than the women. Is there any effort underway to actually anonymously capture the true salaries of cardiologists rather than reported salaries to reaffirm your findings? The reason I ask is I find that it's very difficult for almost any physician to accurately describe what their salary is, at least in the United States, given the extraordinary complexity of our pay stubs. It's not uncommon that I have faculty ask me what they're actually paid.
Very astute observation, Rob. I would love to hear your opinion as to why males were sort of under-responders in our study. I have my own thoughts, but as you state, compensation is complex, especially in the United States, consisting of various components such as contractual salary, bonus or incentive pay, administrative pay supplement, and other sources of income. For the purpose of the study, we asked survey respondents to report their total annual compensation without including any benefits. But as you state, there are inherent limitations in all survey studies. Regarding ongoing efforts to anonymously capture true salaries, the biggest effort currently underway is through AAMC that involves direct institutional reporting of faculty salaries rather than self-reporting. However, one of the downsides of these data sets is that we may lose granularity involving smaller subspecialties such as pediatric electrophysiology. For example, we would all fall under the general category of pediatric cardiologists in the AAMC data.
Yes.
Therefore, as a first step, I believe that subspecialty organizations such as Heart Rhythm Society, PACES, should try and partner directly with institutions to obtain similar data. Ultimately, similar to public reporting of clinical outcomes data, there should be public reporting of salary data. This may be a utopian goal, but it already exists in some universities. And simultaneously, there should be public reporting of equity initiatives to close pay gaps.
Yeah. All great suggestions, Maully. I do think you're going to have a lot of pushback on the public reporting of salaries, but I think I'm probably with you that may be the only way to ever achieve true equity. I wondered if there were other areas of inequity that you and your co-investigators observed or determined that you didn't actually report upon in your report. Is there, for example, more data that we're going to hear about, maybe racial inequities or other forms of inequity?
Rob, we did attempt to analyze compensation based on race and ethnicity, but our sample size was quite small. This also speaks to the critical lack of racial diversity in pediatric electrophysiology. For example, the pediatric electrophysiology demographic is predominantly white, which is about 70% of all physicians. This is followed by Asians that make up about 25% of pediatric electrophysiologists, and only 5% comprise of other races and ethnicities. However, the 2021 AAMC data show that across all general specialties, white men are paid more than men of other races and women of all races and ethnicities. Other areas not formally studied in this report, which I would have loved to include, are variables such as physicians' terminal degrees, board certifications, time in rank, time at institutions, RVUs, productivity, quality, and other metrics of performance. So these variables were not analyzed in our study.
Yeah. Well, Maully, for those in the audience, I think it's early in the morning in India. It's getting a little late here on the East Coast, which is your usual haunt. So I'm going to finish up this brief interview with my final question. And you hinted at it a little bit already, but I have to say that to me, I think that until men and women are truly 50-50 in leadership positions, the inequity that your report describes will likely not be completely abolished. What do you believe are the most important interventions that we could do now before we've achieved equity in leadership that might enact meaningful changes to make pay fair between the sexes?
I believe we need a multi-pronged approach. At a professional level, societies such as ACC and Heart Rhythm Society, most directly connected to cardiologists, should meticulously collect longitudinal data that is stratified by sex, race, and ethnicity, and make that information readily available to their members. At an institutional level, salary equity needs to be a strategic priority, which is publicly announced and led by diverse stakeholders. There should be a commitment to transparency in physician salaries, as well as recruiting, retention, and promotion practices. And institutions should conduct their own internal salary equity studies. Above all, institutions should appoint next-level or enlightened leaders who are truly committed to transparency and equity. And on an individual level, we should turn data into action. Our survey data is a good start for the pediatric electrophysiology community. Women should feel empowered to talk about salaries because remember, pay secrecy actually enables pay gaps. And finally, women should negotiate not only effectively, but fearlessly.
Well, I have to tell you, Maully, if you had not already been the president of PACES, I'd elect you again.
You are very generous with your compliments.
That was
Thank you,
really spectacular. What a wonderful series of suggestions. I really, so much to think about, and I am quite certain that the people who are going to listen to this week's podcast are going to have tremendous food for thought. Maully, I want to congratulate you and all of your co-investigators on a very important work that I'm hoping will be just the start of many efforts to right this ship as soon as possible. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and once again, congratulations.
I appreciate the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much. Well, perhaps you're getting tired of this old chestnut, but when the guest is good, there really is little to add. Dr. Shah provided us with many important facts and also thoughts regarding ways to improve equity in salary. So many of her comments were important and wise that it would be foolish to rehash them, as she is uncommonly clear in her speech and thoughts. I did love her comments about these data hopefully one day emboldening female physicians to talk about these issues, and also think there is wisdom to her comment about pay secrecy enabling pay gaps. The last statement on this topic has not yet been made, but certainly this week's work is one very important first step in the right direction. I'd like to thank Dr. Shah for speaking with us all the way from India this week on the podcast. To conclude this replay episode of Pediheart Pediatric Cardiology Today, we hear a live recording from 57 years ago of the wonderful sextet from Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, and we hear some of the greatest singers of that era, including tenor Carlo Bergonzi, soprano Renato Scotto, and baritone Mario Zanazzi, in a performance from the stage in Italy. Thank you for joining me for this replay episode, and thanks so much to our guest. I hope all have a good week ahead, and I'll see you all next week with a brand new episode.